All right, so starting from this gentleman here next to me, please say your name and the name of your film. Here you go.
I'm Jay Woelfel. First Time Machine is my movie.
I'm Peter Groynham. I'm with the Human Resources team.
Jason Schumacher, Human Resources.
Lily Rains, also Human Resources. Sure. Jennifer Zhang, Autopilot.
Grant Jones, Suppresses.
I usually want to start out by asking the filmmakers, what was the inspiration for making of your film?
I went on vacation with my wife, who's also a producer, Christy, back there. And while she had a massage, I decided to read out in the sun in the desert, and I read a collection of Fredric Brown short stories. I knew Fredric Brown, but I'd never had a whole collection, so I was reading through them, and I read this story. I went like, wow, this is really cool. I could make a really cool short movie about this. And I thought, well, why would I? And then that was the process of starting to, turn it from a page-and-a-half short story into a movie.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, for Human Resources, it had a really interesting background, how it came about, but the prompt or the idea was to write a scene between two characters really before we cast it. So we didn't know what the gender or the background or the age of casting would be. So the goal was to create a two-hander scene between two people that any casting could make it work. So like a professional context was kind of what we came up with, and it eventually talked about issues with AI and sci-fi, but at first it was a little more nebulous.
Yeah, we did it as part of an educational workshop, and so we wanted to keep it as a two-person scene to just make sure it was doable. And yeah, we're trying to push a two-person dialogue scene as far as we could go and make it as interesting as possible.
So this is maybe a boring origin for the story, but the set that we shot on was the last remaining set of Firefly. Anyone remembers that show? And so for knowing that it existed for like 10 years, I wanted to shoot there. So when I was tasked with writing a high concept science fiction film, I was singular about like, I need to shoot on that set, this is my shot. So I try to come up with, knowing intimately the layout of that set, which was a cockpit, a corridor, and like quarters. I was like, I need to come up with some concept that would work just in that space. And like in 30 seconds, I did. And usually, and it was the entire story. Usually my process is I try to like, outline and massage stuff. This just kind of happened, and I was lying down and I sat up. So I feel like I downloaded it from the simulation, and boring, but that's what happened.
That's amazing. All right, so when I was like 10 years old, I used to watch movies on my kitchen counter. We had like TV set up, and I watched this movie called Primer by Shane Carruth, which I think a lot of people have watched. But I watched and I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like filmmaking is such an exploration, and then like science is such an exploration. So I wanted to kind of find a way to merge. I like found this idea of quantum entanglement and collective memory. So I was trying to find a way to merge those two ideas. So that's kind of where Suppresses came about. Also, I just like hit an intersection in my life with my dad where I realized he was just a kid and wanted to kind of explore that idea a little bit more.
So what's next? I mean, what do you plan on taking this to the next level? I also wanted to add, we actually, ironically, I was mentioning, speaking with Jay a few days ago, that we actually had Ronald Mallet here a few years back, who's a time travel scientist, who's working on time travel, and he's also African American, like in the movie. And his story is very kind of interesting in of itself. So it's interesting how these synchronicities. You were not familiar with Ron, right?
When I did my sort of research, eventually I came across him, but I had the idea first. So
of course, yeah.
But so, because after you mentioned that, I was like, yeah, I remember, I don't know, in some discussion I was reading about, some person said, I hate the word AI, I prefer to use, I've forgotten, machine learning. It might have been him, but there was somebody who meant that, and I was just sort of like, oh yeah, let's go that route. But yeah, there was still kind of a chicken and egg, but.
Yeah. So back to the question is, so what comes next? What other projects are you working for? I know in the first year you had a feature with us.
I did.
And so what's next?
That feature was called it was called A Season of Darkness here, and it's called Asylum of Darkness. At that time, it was very kind of Philip K. Dickish, but it was also sort of Lovecraftian. I remember somebody after the screening was like, "This is a horror movie, not science fiction," and I had to be there to explain. Philip K. Dick is not really. I mean, you've done a great job of explaining, but that's out there. You could stream it and all that kind of stuff. This was sort of a post-COVID project, but during COVID, I went back to a graduate project I did at Ohio State. Grant's also an Ohio State alumni, more recently than I, but just sort of, I wore my little O pin. And a project did adaptation of Nathaniel Hawthorne, which was the first adaptation I did. I did a Guy de Maupassant afterwards, and this was the first one I'd done in years. I'd done features. So another friend of mine had done a Kafka adaptation, and during COVID, he was like, why don't we go back to our negatives, do HC transfers, and put these together as a sort of literary anthology, shoot making ofs in terms of the short story and the authors. So that's called Twisted Lit. So it's very weird to be working on a brand new movie and one of the very first films I did, at the same time, and fixing things I always hated. And of course I was stuck with some things I couldn't fix either. But I think I may do another Hawthorne adaptation, I may do another short next. And then that can inspire the feature idea too. But I love shorts. I think there's kind of a new world for them now.
So next up for Human Resources, we have a few more film festivals coming up, and then I'm currently writing a feature to hopefully direct next year, and it's closer to magical realism, but one of the things I love about sci-fi and magical realism is, whatever you're writing or creating, it's always about the relationships, and I feel like sci-fi is just like another context to really dig into that, and exploring that further in my next thing next year.
So our next festival is the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival, and as was mentioned by my partners here, this was a great collaboration along with workforce development grants that have been granted to Minnesota that has now a $25 million tax incentive. And after hot labor summer last summer, where we were on strikes and impending strikes, the idea of labor and what our resources are and what kind of labor we do. It's really interesting. We did this up on the Iron Range, where there is a huge push to try to expand what labor is, and so that's where we got to even be able to create this film. So to be able to premiere it in Minnesota with the team that was a part of it, people who we had heads of departments as professional filmmakers, and then everybody in the crew working under them were people from the Iron Range who had never worked on a film set before, and we had them moving from one department to another, hands-on filmmaking experience. So we're looking forward to seeing how it's responded. It'll be the first time that community gets to close the loop on the thing they did on the day versus what it turned into.
So we're at the tail end of our festival run for Autopilot. At the very beginning, we were fortunate enough to win a festival out in LA, and immediately started developing Autopilot into a feature. And now we're making the feature. we're in development. We have our offer out to the talent that we want, and we've secured some funding. And one of our producers is here. His name is Jonathan Shu, and he's doing social media duty.
Yes, I am.
So that's what's next. Is more Autopilot, but longer.
So Suppressus was my senior thesis film back at Ohio State, and excited to pick your brain a little bit more. But plans. I work in corporate America now. I would love. So I essentially shot this as would love to turn this into a feature. I have it written down and kind of have it built out in my head. But no plans right now for taking it any further. Really appreciate you guys taking a chance on it. But yeah, no plans for going any further.
Yeah, I think that what we see in a lot of these films, and this festival specifically, is a large percentage of films dealing with healing, or the format of sci-fi to really explore healing, how it can happen. Like in your case, we received several films, 3 films dealing with PTSD. We received a whole bunch of films dealing with dissociative disorders, repressed memories, addiction, and so on. So I think you're definitely on the right track. I think all of you guys are, because I think there is something in the zeitgeist that it yearns for a kind of a healing process, maybe from COVID, maybe pre-COVID, but definitely I think that this is a very timely film. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to open up the floor to the audience for questions of the filmmakers. There you go.
Yeah, so for the director of Suppressus, first of all, just thank you everyone. What an extraordinary program of films. So thank you all. I'd love to chat with all of you, and I might try to do just that when we get out of here. But my question is, one of the many things I really loved was that this poor guy is taking this risk on this process, and these 2 guys are bickering throughout, and the disagreement about whether it's working or not. And I thought that added a really extra dimension that was sort of dehumanizing for him, and that these guys are, he's risking his brain. So I'm curious what inspired creating that dimension of the relationship, that the 2 researchers are kind of at odds with each other and having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, so it was definitely to dehumanize him. Wanted them to ignore him to a certain extent, just to break him down. I wanted to beat him down as much as possible at the beginning, and then throughout, I don't know if it's evident, but like one of the scientists kind of starts to buddy up with him a little bit, and also I didn't want them to just be like plot devices. I wanted them to kind of be their own characters as well. And as you'll notice, like the younger scientist kind of has his chance to give the like head nod and say like go for it with the final like experiment or whatever. But yeah, like it was trying to break him down. It was just trying to beat down that character as much as possible to try. I mean, you only have like 20 minutes, so like trying to just really break him down to make him more accessible throughout the film.
Thank you. Really well done.
Thank you.
Other questions for the audience? Other questions? There you go.
Can I ask, I guess it's for everybody, it's so funny, I saw like a similar pattern of they were all, like you said, sort of therapeutic in like what they were trying to accomplish, and it's interesting, like all of them kind of came back full circle and redid their process. So I was just wondering, but I don't know that any of the why was there. Like I didn't understand what you were like why was there an interview? Like what's the interview for? I mean, I kind of get it in the, like I could feel it, but I didn't know, nobody spoke why, and nobody spoke why, and nobody spoke why you were in space. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Is there a reason? Like, is that, I'm not a filmmaker. So, I don't know, I just wondered.
I can say for human resources, there were 4 of us who were collaborating on the why, and so in the Venn diagram there is a heightened sense of morality play when we're putting ourselves in the near distant future or in this genre, right? And the idea of like this time in history where everyone had to stop and you are forced to reflect, and where is it that your demons are catching up on you, and what is it that you're willing to face. And in a world, I keep repeating the phrase, in a world where we outsource nearly everything, who is teaching humanity? And if you've been at the victim of any recent customer service interaction, people don't know how to make fucking eye contact anymore. So there's this impetus of like, do we have to factory train androids how to be humans so that someone will hug you at your funeral or high five you at your retirement party? And in the wide, it's like Chris, the interviewer, played by me, after this next Terry, the AI, probably goes out for a smoke break. Wide shot is all of these factory training workers smoking while they've been training whatever that AI android was. What? Yeah, losing their humanity.
I would just add on, at least for ours, like the concept was always, we're gonna watch an android whose job it is to provide emotional support to others, get the last 2% of its training, like fine tune this individual so they are ready to provide care. And I think in the development process, originally it was a little more linear, and then we kind of mixed it up a little bit just to make it more interesting. And I mean, production wise, I think for a lot of these shorts and other festivals we've been in over the years, because generally you only have a few locations, like at this budget scale and this production scale. So I think it's like just a practical thing to make the stories a little bit cyclical, because we're going to come back to this room a few times. So how can the characters change? How can the story change while we kind of stay in the same few places? And that's very much the story of this. We had a warehouse and this kind of building up this new studio up in northern Minnesota. And it's like, okay, we're going to have 2.5 locations in this building. How do we maximize them with story and character moments? Which for ours definitely becomes a cyclical story. I think that's kind of consistent with this style of filmmaking.
And just the last thing is that cycle ends up becoming a mirror, right? A reflection for you to then reflect back on your own space.
Right.
So the why of filling in that white, maybe filling in the white. No.
Short films in general versus features short films tend to be sort of plot heavy. And so sometimes these things, like you're asking why and things like that, sometimes that's what the movie's about. So it's not like, in a feature or some other thing, it's like the whys you sort of explain. It's really can tend to be more about other things. I think I'm exclude myself from this, but what's nice is that these films are also about people. But short stories, that's a lot of it, the plot is part of what you're really telling. So the plots get told in weird ways, where you come back to the beginning, or you hide what's really going on until the end. Philip Brown was famous for like really short stories. And he wrote one where it's like the last man in the world is in a room and there's a knock at the door. That's the whole story. Because you go like, oh, anyway, so it might just be a thing about shorts and stuff. Also, he deserves credit for picking these films which are sort of not the same, but feel like a whole. That's what good curating is all about.
Real briefly, I think science fiction fans, science fiction filmmakers in general are, quite fascinated with new perspectives, getting people to adopt new perspectives, and the coincidence that you're pointing out, which I didn't think about until you pointed out, is, it makes sense when you have something in the beginning that we all don't have context for, right? And then through the journey of watching the film, we adopt a new perspective, we have context, so that when something happens again that is repetition, recontextualized, we're subconsciously forced to see it differently. So I guess it's a device that we all used.
I think we got time for one more question from the audience. One more.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah.
For Autopilot, I think you said there was a Firefly set was available. What's the Firefly set?
So Firefly was a show that was, I think, in the 90s or maybe early 2000s. It was a Joss Whedon thing, earlier in his career, and it was, it was like a space western, and it has a very like rabid cult following because it only lasted, I think, 13 episodes before it was canceled, and then it had like a feature, but no more sequels. So this stage out in LA, it's the last remaining set. They built it for episode 3, and then the stage just kept renting it, and they never tore it down. So in a weird way, it became like a living museum for the show, and it just keeps falling apart, and it still gets rented to me.
You have to be in LA to use the Firefly set.
No, you can go out there. Is your money green?
Yeah, I've seen other movies shoot there, because you're looking for a spaceship, like, there's not many choices any city you're in. In LA, there used to be like 2 or 3. Find out of 1 now, that's probably it.
Okay, guys, thank you. Let's give a big hand to this organization. Thank you for coming. Great job.